So to start off with, I'd like to ask the adjudicators, all of you, and one of you can volunteer for who would like to go first, but what do you think is the most misunderstood thing about the role of an adjudicator?
Probably from my point of view, an adjudicator, one, is not always a lawyer, and probably two, an adjudicator equally is not always a QS and therefore not there to value the work in every case. Probably from my point of view, the two things I've come across most.
I'd add to that I think a lot of the time there's an expectation, just judging by some of the submissions I see from time to time, that parties expect an adjudicator maybe to have an inquisitorial role, or to be a fix-it man to help get them out of their problems. And again, that's just not something that an adjudicator is able to do.
Yeah, look, I'll add to that, because what Warren has said, I think, is touched squarely on the head. But I'll answer the question, Janelle, from the perspective of what I've seen of a lot of adjudicators. There are a number of adjudicators, obviously none of them will be named, who think their role is to inquire and to resolve the dispute between the parties. And to some degree that, in my experience, has facilitated what Warren has just touched on. The role of an adjudicator is to decide an amount of payment to be made. That is it. Unless that is fully understood by the punters who are making these applications, then you'll get a lot of negative commentary about what the outcome has been.
And we can only consider the documents we've got, and I think that's one of the biggest issues. And we have to consider jurisdiction. If we don't have jurisdiction first, then what is being discussed in terms of claim, we can't look at. So the parties, and particularly the claimants, need to understand the onus is on them to prove jurisdiction to us. We can, certainly with the changes in BIFA now, we have to make a decision on jurisdiction before we get an adjudication response. So it is something that I come across all the time, and certainly through master builders with members, that it's this thought that you just give it to them and they work it out, or it's just solely on the basis of am I entitled or not. That's not the question. Does the adjudicator have jurisdiction? First question has to be answered by the claimant.
About you, Chris, anything to add there?
I think the concept of pay now, argue later, which seems to be a principle that came out of one case, and certainly some of the big end of town solicitors have used that as an attempt to convince an adjudicator to sort of not go too deeply into things. I think one hassle we have, and I'm one of these warm and fuzzies, I hate litigating and I have to on behalf of clients because I'm a lover, not a fighter, and I probably breached what all the other esteemed adjudicators talk about. I do try and see if there's some way of giving somebody something where you can see the merits lie that way, but you can't. You're confined by the law. I've found, where literally a claimant put in an application on a QBCC form which had the wrong interest rate on it, and that just bounced the entire claim, and I had to find there was no jurisdiction, which is dreadful because it forces people to go off and litigate. Perhaps they ought to have done that in the first place, but I mean the legislation was changed as a consequence. But I think adjudicators, and I've learned certainly from a number of these colleagues and CPDs, you've got to pull back and just make a judgment according to law. So don't think you're going to get some fair judgment because the person's a nice bloke. It won't work because it'll just get bounced upstairs anyway.